Hi everyone, I'm Kara Erickson and I'm a developer on the Angular team, and I'm here to talk to you guys about forms. So we're going to go over the two available forms modules, the forms module, also known as Angular 1 style or template-driven forms, and the reactive forms module, also known as reactive forms. But before we get into the differences, let's talk about some of the underlying structure they have in common. So forms are built up of three essential building blocks: form controls, form groups, and form arrays. So what's a form control? If we take a step back, let's consider a text input in the DOM. There are certain pieces of data that you want to extract from this. You might want to know what value the user has typed into it. You might want to know whether that input is valid according to your validation rules. You might want to know how the user has interacted with the control. Have they changed its value? Have they touched it yet? And you might want to be notified of certain events, like when the value or the status changes. All of these pieces of information collectively form the model of the form control. So a form control is just a class like any other class. So if you create an instance, you can inspect its properties. So you can look at its value, its validation status, whether or not it's pristine or it's touched. And you can also make programmatic changes to its state. You can set its value, you can reset it, you can disable it. Sometimes it makes more sense to think of a series of form controls as a group, for instance, an address. And that's where form groups come in. Form groups are collections of form controls that are registered by name. So a form in itself is a form group. So here we have an address form group that consists of 4 form controls: street, city, state, and zip. Form group is also a class, so we can create an instance and pass in a collection of child controls. And we can also inspect its value and its validation status. Its value is always going to be calculated from the values of its children, and its status is always going to be calculated from the statuses of its children. So you're always working with objects here. And the last building block is the form array. Form arrays are also groups of controls, but they're conceptualized as an array, so you register them by index. These are great for if you have controls that are going to be of dynamic or unknown length. So again, you can create an instance form array, you can pass in an array of child controls, you can inspect its value and its status, both of which are calculated based on children value and status respectively, and you're always going to be working with arrays. So both form modules have these 3 building blocks. What makes them different? Well, we have the text control in the DOM, and we have our form control models. How can we sync them up together? So the modules have different opinions on how to do this. So in the forms module, we have these ng model directives, and in the reactive forms module, we have the form prefix directives, and they sync them together differently. So the forms module is Angular 1 style, so everything happens in the template. So directives are going to be making all of your changes. You're never going to be instantiating form controls, form groups, or form arrays yourself. The directives will do this for you implicitly. So you tell the directive some basic information, and it tries to do the right thing. This is great and convenient, but since so much is going on under the hood, it tends to be easier when you're getting started and get harder as you try to tackle more complex concepts. For instance, because in order to maintain unidirectional data flow, in the template, template-driven forms have to be asynchronous. And so it inherits all the complexity that comes with asynchronicity. On the reactive side, you're going to be instantiating form controls and form groups explicitly as needed. So you're directly manipulating the form control models yourself in the component class. So when you do this, it requires a little bit more investment up front, and sometimes that means more boilerplate, but it's also more explicit. There's no magic going on under the hood, and you don't have the constraints of the template, and for these reasons, reactive forms tend to behave a little bit more predictably. Everything is synchronous, and you don't have the template in the middle, so it feeds into reactive patterns a little bit easier. That being said, both of these approaches are legitimate, and based on your code style and your preferences, it's really up to you what you decide to choose for your application. Okay, so now we're going to go into a demo to kind of dive a little deeper into the differences between these modules. So I've prepared a demo project that has 2 identical forms. One that we're going to demo with the forms module, and one that we're going to use the reactive forms module. So from now on, I'm going to refer to them as template-driven on the left and reactive on the right, just so that you don't get confused when I say forms module, since they're both forms modules. Okay, so we started out with the basic HTML5 form. We don't have any forms module specific logic in it yet, just names and placeholders. So I've preloaded it with some controls for the name, some controls for the account, like the username and password, and whether or not you'd like to receive a newsletter. So how can we make this into a reactive form? So we're going to start with reactive forms because it'll help understand what's going on with template-driven forms. So we start in the class here, and we start by creating a form group, because as you'll recall, a form is just a form group. And we'll pass in the child controls that we need here. So this is going to look a little repetitive because we're instantiating form control over and over here, but I just wanted to show you this so you can see what's actually going on. But we can clean this up with form builder. So if we inject form builder here, we can write this.form equals form builder.group. And what form builder.group returns is just a form group instance, but you see the real benefit when you pass in child controls, because you no longer have to create these instances yourself. You can just pass in its arguments directly. So here we're just passing in an initial empty value. And then I'm going to change this to a form group type. So now we have half the equation. We've created the model the way that we want to. Now let's work on syncing it with the view. So on this parent form tag, we're going to use the form group directive, and we're going to pass in the form we just created. Then for each individual form control, we're going to add the form control name directive. And what this does is it looks for the form control of this name first in the parent form group that we passed in at the top. So it's going to look for the name registered with first in form. So let's see how this works. So if we were to print the value, we already have access to the form group instance, right? So we can just access value directly. And then here you can see we have all of the form controls registered, and if we type nonsense into it, you can see it's syncing on the bottom. So how do you do the same thing with template-driven forms? Let's see. Okay, so on the template-driven form, we don't have to do anything on the form tag, because if you import the forms module, the form tag will activate the ngForm directive automatically for you, so ngForm is already active. What ngForm does is it creates a form group instance, and it will sync it with this form tag. But we still have to think about its child controls. So for each of these individual controls, we can add ngModel. And what ngModel does is it creates a form control instance. It will register it with the parent form, and then it will sync it to the DOM element that it's on. So here, we can again print the value. But in this case, we don't have access to the controls or the groups directly, since it's template-driven, but we do have access to the directives. So we can export ngForm into a local template variable, and then we can print f.value. Okay. Wait for that to reload. Okay, so now we have all the registrations here at the bottom. And again, when you type, it immediately syncs. Okay, so you may have noticed that we're not binding to ngModel. It's just this standalone attribute. And that's because all you need to make ngModel active is just the attribute name. It'll create the form control, give you validation status, value, whatever you need. When you actually bind to ngModel, what you're doing is you're creating a value binding. So if you wanted to set an initial value for ngModel, you could create a one-way binding here and bind it to some arbitrary object on your component class, like that. And then in your forms component, you can set a name like Nancy Drew. Okay, and then if you refresh this, eventually you'll see Nancy Drew. So that's how you can set values. Obviously, you can still use two-way bindings if you like. It's perfectly fine, but you already have the form value here that will continue to be updated, so that's not always necessary. It's really up to you. Okay, so let's do the same thing on the reactive side. So we have these initial values here, so we could just pass in Nancy Drew right away when we're creating the form group, but often you'll be getting your data asynchronously from an HTTP request or some other service, so you might want to do it programmatically. So we have two choices. You can do something called set value, which requires that you pass in every control in the form. And set value is great because it allows us to do some error checking for you. So if you mistype something or you do the wrong nesting, we can throw a friendly error that says that the control is missing. There's another function called patch value that accepts supersets and subsets. So it's really convenient, but it also doesn't throw any helpful errors like that. But in this case, we're going to use patch value because this is a demo, and I don't want to type anything out. Okay, so this says Nancy Drew. Let's refresh. And we have Nancy Drew. Okay, so we have these account controls here, username, password, and confirm, and they ideally would be conceived as a group, right? You have your account information all together. So what we can do is we can create a nested group for the account. So we can just register in our reactive form a new control called account, and then we can nest in formbuilder.group, like this, and that will do half the work for us. And then in the actual form, we can add form group name equals account. So what this does is it will look for a form group instance with the name account registered on this parent form, once again, so looking for an existing instance. So you might wonder, why do we have to do this? This isn't even a form control, right? Well, there's certain benefits to doing this, one of which is we can mirror CSS classes based on the group's validation status and value. So we can put ng invalid on the entire div, so you can make a nice red border if it's invalid. We can also support validator directives on groups. There's a lot of things that this will help support. Okay, so let's go back and check. Now we have this account nested group here, which is kind of nice. So let's do the same thing on our template-driven form. So here, we can add ng model group for account. And what ng model group does is it creates the form group instance, registers it with parent form, and syncs it to the div in the same way. So that's all you have to do. So here on the template-driven side, we have this nested form as well. Okay, so at this point, we've learned how to get the value, we can set the value, we can nest groups. Let's move on to adding some validations. So one thing you might want to do is check that the user has passed in both a password and a password confirm. So in our reactive form, we're going to add these validators on the component class. So in here, we can add validators.required, and spell it correctly. And then here, we can also add validators.required. And so this array just means that we're passing in a bunch of different arguments into the form control that's being instantiated below. Okay, so validators required is a built-in validator that we offer for you, and it's just a function that takes a control and determines whether it's valid or not. So in our reactive form, let's go ahead and print the status so you can see it, form.status, and we can also print the status of the password so you can see the individual one too. So do that. So this is a little bit long, but in real life, you'd probably create a getter for this if you're using it all over the place. Okay, so we'll let that refresh. Did it refresh? I might have already refreshed. Okay, so now you can see as soon as we type into password, it's valid, and as soon as we type into both of them, the form is valid. Okay, so we're going to add this validator on the other form. So on this side, we can just add required, and that will do the trick, but this is actually kind of more than it seems. Required is actually a directive when it's used with ngModel, and it's a directive that provides validators.required on this element. So we're actually, the directive is doing what we just did on the reactive side. Okay, so, let's actually log the status here so we can see it. So the form status, this is going to be form.control.status, and we're going to also log the password status, which we can export using the directive once again. So this will be ngModel. So you might notice that we're doing f.control.status and password.control.status. And that's because you have to remember that we're exporting the directives, we're not exporting the controls. So most properties will fall directly through, but some of them don't, so you have to kind of know the difference there. Okay, so I think this is ready. So as soon as you type into password, it's valid, and then the form is valid once both of them have values. Okay, so another validator you might want is to check whether the password is equal to the confirmation, right? We don't have a built-in validator for this, but this is something you can easily create as a custom validator. So I can show you how to do that. So in our reactive form, we're going to create a password matcher function, and it just takes an abstract control. And an abstract control just means that it's the superclass for form controls, form groups, and form arrays. And this function, we're going to pass into the account level, and I'll tell you why in a second. So we're going to need to read the password's value and the password confirmation's value, right? And they're siblings. So when you have cases like this where you have multiple controls that need to be considered for validation, you generally want to go up a level. So here we're going to put this on the account group. Okay, so we want to check if the password is equal to the confirm. And if it is, we're going to return no errors. And if it isn't, we're going to return a meaningful error, like no match. And you might notice that we're not just returning a Boolean, like true or false. Instead, we're returning errors if it's invalid and null if it's valid. This helps us so that we can compose validators in a sane way. Okay, so we have this password matcher function. We've passed it into here. Now in our reactive form, let's go ahead and print the account errors so you can see how this works. So let's do errors, JSON. Is this the right form? Yes, it is. Just checking. Okay. Account status. Okay, so here we have no match is true. Oh, no match is always true. That's not right. Okay, let's go back and check what we're doing. So here, let's look. Oh, I need to check the value. Okay, so wonderful live debugging. So let's refresh this. Okay, so the account status is null to start with. And then as soon as you type into it and they're different, it's no match, and now it's a match. Cool. Okay, so on the template-driven side, in order to do the same thing, we're going to create a validator directive. And so this is the same strategy that we used for our built-in validators, like required and min length and so on and so forth. So we're going to create a directive called password matcher. And then we're going to paste, since I am lazy, this function. Okay, so the same function. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to provide to ng validators, which is the group of built-in validators, which is a multi-provider, the password matcher function. And so what this does is it provides it on the element that you put password matcher on, and then ng model or form control name or whatever can pick up the validator from there and compose it. We have to do one more thing here, and we have to check that password and the confirm are both present. And this is because in template-driven forms, the registration is asynchronous. So sometimes validations will run before the child controls have actually been registered, so we have to check this. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this to our module definition before I forget. And this is password matcher, okay. And then in our form here, we want to put this again on the group level, so it'll be on this div. So we'll write password matcher. And then we can export engine model group, so we can look at the account status again. Oh, this will be account.control.errors, run it through JSON again. Okay. So account errors are null, now it's no match, now it's valid again. Okay, so now that we've done some validators, we've done some custom things, let's start thinking about adding a custom value accessor. So maybe we're tired of these radio buttons, we think they're super boring. We can create a fancier control for this if we want. So we're going to go ahead and create a switch control, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's going to be a button that says yes or no, toggle on and off. Okay, so each button is either going to be selected or not selected. And on click, we're going to toggle it true or false. This will be yes, this will be no, it's false, this is not on. And then our switch control components, we're going to set is on to a Boolean, and then take a Boolean and be able to set this based on what we get. Okay. So let's actually take a look at what it looks like before we do anything else. So in our reactive form, we can get rid of these radio buttons and add the switch control. Okay, let's just see what this looks like. All right, so we have yes or no, but you'll notice newsletter is sad and doesn't change. So that's because we haven't actually integrated this with the form. So we can do that by implementing control value accessor. So control value accessor, let's see if I have this up, is an interface that directives can implement so that Angular knows how to integrate it with the form. So we have value accessor directives for every type of built-in form control, like radio buttons and selects and so on. So here's one for the text input. And so it has three methods that are required: write value, register on change, and register untouched. And these will tell Angular how to work with the control. So we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to implement control value accessor. And then before we forget, we want to make sure that we provide this as a value accessor so that our form control directives can see it. Then we're going to use switch control component. And if you're using ES6, you might want to make this a forward ref. OK, so let's create our three functions: write value, register on change, and register on touched. OK, so write value is essentially our model to view handler. So whenever the model from ng model or form control wants to write to the DOM element, this is what should be called. So it takes any value. And then in our case, we want to do this. So if somebody wants to set the value of the button, isOn is what's determining whether or not it looks like it's selected, right? So we want to make isOn equal whatever the Boolean value is. Register on change takes a callback function of this type. And we just want to save this callback. I'll show you why in a second. So let me just add the type here. OK. And so this is the kind of view to model handler. So whenever something changes from within the component, we want to let the model at the top know about it. So we're going to call on change whenever something happens from within the component. So when the button is clicked from a user, that's kind of the view level change. So in here, we want to call this.onChange in our toggle method. OK, and then in our reactive form, we're going to re-add form control name to newsletter, I think. And we will let it refresh. And you can now see that newsletter is toggling with the rest of the form, which is nice. The nice thing about implementing control value accessor is that it works the same with forms module and the reactive forms module. So without making any changes to switch control, we can just right away in our template-driven form use switch control and give it the alternate ng model syntax. So here, then if you allow this to refresh, then we have the same behavior. OK, so that's it for the demo. So this barely scratches the surface of what's possible with forms and reactive forms, but for time reasons, I kept it pretty basic. But keep an eye out. I have more talks coming at the end of the year. Perhaps we'll be able to get something more complex. So we also have resources for the slides, and I'll be pushing the code up from this demo in the next 10, 15 minutes. So that's it. Thank you.